I came back to Ohio in the summer of 1946 with nothing but a worn-out duffel bag, a faded army jacket, and a letter so old and folded it felt more like skin than paper. I'd written it in a trench near Monte Cassino during one of those rare hours when the guns had stopped and silence felt like a gift. I told her I'd return. I promised she'd be my wife. That letter had traveled with me through every battle, every sleepless night, tucked inside my shirt pocket like a heartbeat from back home. The smell of damp soil and summer corn hung in the air as I stepped off the train and walked the cracked sidewalk of my hometown. The same small town where everyone used to know your name and where now the silence felt heavier than the heat. Storefronts still stood, though their windows bore scars. The bell at First Baptist didn't ring anymore. Nothing had been untouched by war, not even this quiet corner of America. As I made my way down Maple Street, past the house where I'd first kissed her, I noticed the old Methodist church across from her family's house. The doors were closed, but a withered bouquet hung from the handle, a local tradition I'd almost forgotten. Dried flowers, bound in ribbon, placed there after a wedding or when mourning a love lost in war. I stared at them for a long time, hoping they meant something else. But I already knew. The house looked different. The porch swing was gone. The windows that once spilled light and laughter now held nothing but shadow. I knocked, but no one answered. It wasn't until I turned to leave that I saw the paper posted on the church bulletin board, weathered, curling at the edges, but still legible. Wedding, December 20th, 1945. Sarah Matthews and Michael Callahan. Michael, my younger brother. The one who didn't go to war because of his asthma. The one I asked, no, begged, to look after her while I was gone. The one who promised me he'd keep her safe. Not that he'd take her from me. I stood there, too stunned to speak, too empty to cry. The cicadas buzzed in the trees, the sun dipped lower behind the steeple, and I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to think until that moment. The war hadn't taken everything from me. Time had. If this story touches your heart the way it touched mine to write it, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep sharing true stories that inspire, move, and surprise. And now, brace yourself, because what happens next will change everything. The town hadn't changed much, at least not on the surface, but it also wasn't the same place I had left behind. Maybe it was me who'd changed. The boy who walked off to war in 1942 wasn't the man walking these cracked sidewalks now. The building still stood, the steeple still reached toward the sky, the same trees still swayed in the same August wind. But the soul of the place, the feeling of it, was different, thinner somehow, like the world had taken a deep breath and hadn't exhaled since the war began. The general store still had the same wooden sign, though now it hung at a slant, its corners weathered by 4 winters and too many memories. I walked past the old diner where she and I used to share milkshakes on Sundays after church. Now it was boarded up, the front windows shattered, and a rusted "Help Wanted" sign leaned behind the dusty glass. Nobody inside, no smells of frying bacon, no sound of the jukebox or her laughter echoing across the booths. What startled me most wasn't the damage, but the quiet. No children playing stickball in the alley behind the schoolhouse, no front doors left open to let in the summer breeze. Even the dogs barked less, as if they too were mourning something no one dared speak aloud. I passed the Howard family's barn, where Michael and I used to race through the fields as boys, and saw the remnants of a flag still pinned to the fence, tattered but hanging on. Someone had chalked, "Welcome home, boys," on the gate, though the rain had nearly erased it. For a moment I wondered if it was for me, but I knew better. No one expected me. No one believed I'd return. And when I asked around, quietly, hesitantly about Sarah, I was met with soft sighs, polite nods, or worse, silence. Old Mrs. Jenkins, who once taught Sunday school, placed her hand gently on mine and said, "She's married now, taken care of. You should be grateful for that." Grateful. That word echoed inside me like a bullet. Grateful that my brother, the one I trusted most in the world, had replaced me in her life. Grateful that he wore a ring meant for me. I turned away from her porch, not wanting to say something I couldn't take back, and walked along the riverbank, where she and I used to skip stones and talk about names for the children we might have one day. She always liked Lila, and I teased her it sounded too proper, like a librarian. She would roll her eyes and throw a stone farther than mine, as if proving something. Now the river ran just as it always had, smooth and steady, pretending nothing had changed, though I felt like screaming at it for forgetting. I sat on the same bench we used to share in early spring, the one overlooking the bend in the water where wildflowers grew in clusters. I pulled out the letter again, the one I'd written her after the battle at Casino, folded and unfolded 1,000 times. The ink was smudged, the creases soft like worn cloth. I ran my fingers over the words. If I survive, I'll come back to you. If I don't, know that I died with your name in my heart. And I realized that even though I had survived, something still hadn't made it home. I thought about what it meant to return, to survive a war only to find that nothing had waited, that your house had been lived in by someone else, that the chair where your love once sat now held another, that the world had kept spinning while you were paused in gunfire, prayers and mud. And maybe it wasn't anyone's fault, but that didn't make it hurt less. I stopped by the train station the next morning, unsure why, maybe to leave, maybe just to see if she would pass by. Instead, I saw a young soldier, freshly home, lifting his little girl into the air while his wife cried into his shoulder. The sight should have made me happy, and maybe somewhere deep down it did, but mostly I just felt like I was standing on the wrong side of something that used to belong to me. That afternoon, I finally turned down our old road, her road now, not mine, and saw the porch steps Michael and I had painted as boys, now worn by different feet. The screen door creaked in the wind. A red tricycle leaned against the post, and that's when it hit me. They hadn't just married, they'd made a life, a whole life while I was gone, and I was nothing more than a memory haunting their beginnings. Some nights, I still hear the sound of mortar shells in my sleep. Not just the boom and echo, but the hollow pause right before they land. That half second when time stands still and you wonder if this one has your name on it. I'd lie there, pressed against frozen dirt, my hands clutching the dog tags around my neck like a child with a blanket, praying not to God, but to the memory of her voice, to the promise of returning home, to the hope that somewhere in Ohio, someone still believed I was coming back. War changes you in ways no one warns you about. It doesn't just carve lines into your face or take away pieces of your hearing. It rearranges the wiring inside your soul. You stop thinking in days and start thinking in moments. When was the last time I ate, slept, saw a tree that wasn't broken in half by shrapnel? When was the last time I laughed and meant it? I remember the mud in Italy, not just any mud, but the kind that pulled at your boots like it wanted to keep you. I remember the way blood smelled when it mixed with rain, the way letters from home felt like salvation in the form of paper and ink. I carried hers in my chest pocket, folded and worn thin, and on the worst nights, when even the stars looked like dying embers, I would unfold those pages and read her words out loud, like scripture. She wrote simply, never dramatic, always hopeful. I made peach pie today, she'd write. Your mom stopped by. She says the chickens miss you. And sometimes just, I miss you, every day. Come back to me. I held onto those lines the way a drowning man clutches driftwood. They reminded me who I was, who I used to be, and who I wanted to be again. Not a soldier, not a killer, but the man who danced with her in bare feet on the porch after the 4th of July fireworks. There was a boy from Kansas, name was Benny, who died next to me on a hill outside Monte Cassino. He had freckles and a picture of his baby sister in his helmet. One minute, we were joking about hot dogs and ball games, and the next minute, he was gone. A flash of light, a sound like the sky cracking open, and his body landing on mine like a final embrace. I had to write to his parents. I didn't know what to say, so I told them what I wished someone would write to my mother if it had been me. That he was brave, that he smiled a lot, that he talked about home as if it was paradise. I buried more friends than I can remember, some with names, some without, and with each one, a part of me was buried too. Not all wounds bleed. Some just linger inside you, waiting to wake up when you least expect it. Sometimes it's the smell of diesel, sometimes it's the way someone says goodbye. I wrote Sarah one last letter after Benny died. I told her I was coming home, that I had survived too many things to not see her again, that if she still wanted me, I would never leave her side for as long as I lived. I didn't know then that the letter wouldn't make it before her vows did, that she would read my words as a wife, not mine, but my brother's. After the war ended, after the medals were handed out like consolation prizes, after the parades and the speeches and the hollow salutes, I realized something no one talks about. Survival is its own kind of grief. You return to a world that kept spinning without you. You're grateful to be alive, but you're also angry, not at anyone in particular, just at the silence that followed you home. At the space your name used to fill in someone else's life. There were nights overseas when I would stare at the sky, trying to remember what her laugh sounded like. I'd think about the way she used to run her fingers through her hair when she was thinking, or how she hummed while washing dishes. I carried those memories like matches in a storm, fragile, flickering, always threatening to go out. And yet somehow they didn't. Now when I look back, I don't just remember the pain, I remember the tiny kindnesses, the soldier who shared his last cigarette, the medic who kept humming Swing Low Sweet Chariot as he stitched a leg back together, the chaplain who read psalms to no one in particular during the shelling. And I remember the sound of her name in my mind, constant, steady, a rhythm I marched to even when everything else was chaos. Sarah never knew what that war took from me, or maybe she did, and that's why she married Michael. Maybe she saw in him the part of me that wasn't broken, the part I lost somewhere between the beach in Anzio and the ridge at Casino. I can't blame her for needing something solid. I was only smoke when I came back, but I came back. And sometimes that's all you have, the fact that you made it home, even if home is no longer yours. I stood in front of the old White House I grew up in longer than I ever stood in formation, longer than I ever stood on watch, staring at the same chipped paint and creaky porch swing that had once carried summer evenings and the soft creak of laughter, now resting in silence as if waiting for someone who'd never come home. I'd imagined this return 1,000 times. My mother rushing out with tears in her eyes, arms wide, the smell of her cornbread drifting from the kitchen, my brother greeting me like he used to, all handshakes and backslaps and talk of baseball. But the truth was, I didn't know what waited behind that door, and for the first time since the war began, I was afraid to open it. When she did answer, my mother didn't speak at first. Her eyes filled, her hands flew to her mouth, and she stared at me like a ghost, like she'd seen an apparition formed from old letters and dusty dreams. And then she pulled me into her arms with such force that my knees almost buckled, and for a moment I was home, truly home, wrapped in her scent of flower and garden soil, her sobs pressing into my shoulder like forgiveness. But it didn't last. There was something in her embrace, a tightness, a hesitation, not hesitation in love, but in truth, something unsaid pressing between us like a book left open on the kitchen table. She sat me down, poured sweet tea like she used to, her hands trembling just enough for me to notice, and began talking about the garden, about the ration stamps, about how the Johnsons down the road had lost their youngest in Okinawa. She talked about everything except Sarah, everything except Michael. The names hovered in the air like smoke from a candle no one dared blow out. I listened. I nodded. I asked nothing at first, but eventually I had to say it. I saw the notice, I said quietly. The wedding. Her hands froze around her glass. She didn't look at me right away. When she did, her eyes were heavy with a kind of sorrow I hadn't seen in Europe, but recognized just the same. The kind you feel when you know you did what you had to, but it still feels like betrayal. She waited, she whispered. Longer than anyone thought she would. Longer than I would have, truth be told. We thought you were gone. Your letters stopped. News from your unit dried up. We prayed, of course, but after a while, praying feels like lying. Then she told me everything I hadn't wanted to hear, that Sarah came by almost every day after I left, that she'd help tend the garden, bring over jars of peaches, sit on the porch in silence, just to feel close to me. That Michael had been kind, gentle, always looking out for her, never overstepping, not until the winter of 45, when she fell ill and he stayed by her bedside for 3 days straight. That love wasn't born, but built, out of shared grief, long silences, and the weight of believing they had lost the same person. He never meant to, she said, and neither did she. It just happened. I wanted to rage. I wanted to break something, but I sat there listening to my mother's voice, steady but full of quiet guilt, and I realized that there was no enemy to fight here, no sides to take, just time, relentless, unforgiving, unshakable time that had continued without me. I heard the door open behind me and felt a chill run down my spine before I turned. Michael stood there, a little older, a little broader, with the same eyes that had watched my back through childhood games and teenage fights. He said my name like a prayer, low and shaking, and I could tell he'd rehearsed this moment more than once. He reached for me. I shook his hand. We stood there awkwardly like two strangers bound by shared blood and divided by unspoken pain. He tried to apologize. I stopped him. I didn't want the apology, not yet, maybe not ever. We talked about Europe, about who made it home and who didn't. He told me he read every article, kept track of the battalion reports, even called the Red Cross. He had tried, in his own way, to believe I was alive. And then, finally, I asked the question I hadn't wanted to voice, the one that had been haunting me since I saw that photo on the mantel, Sarah, Michael, and a little girl, no more than 2 years old, with curls the same color as mine and eyes that echoed our father's. Is she mine? Michael didn't answer. My mother looked down, and I understood. Maybe she was. Maybe she wasn't. Maybe no one would ever know for sure. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that no one had spoken of it, no one had prepared me, and now I was supposed to accept the possibility that a piece of me might live in that house, call another man Daddy, and never know the sound of my voice. That night I stayed in my old room, untouched since 1942, with my baseball gloves still on the shelf and the war maps I'd tacked up as a boy still curling at the corners. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, hearing echoes of a life that no longer fit. The walls remembered me, but no one else really did. I sat on the church steps that evening, just as the sky was bleeding into dusk, the same brick steps where she and I once talked about names for our future children and whether we'd live in town or on a piece of land out by the river. The steeple still reached high above, proud and silent, but the bell no longer rang, as if time had dulled its voice too. I hadn't planned on being there, but something in me needed to return to the place where the promise had started, even if it wasn't kept. When I saw her coming down the gravel path, every nerve in my body stood still. She wore a simple dress, pale blue like her eyes, with her hair pinned up the way she used to when we'd walk to the dance hall. There was a stiffness in her shoulders, like she was holding something in, something she had carried too long. We looked at each other for what felt like a lifetime before either of us said a word. "I thought you were dead," she said, her voice trembling and quiet, like the wind might carry the words away before they reached me. "I almost was," I replied, and my voice sounded like someone else's, low, unfamiliar, lined with something heavier than bitterness. But I came back. Her eyes filled then, but she didn't cry. Not really. She sat down beside me, close but not touching, and for a moment we watched the sun dip behind the fields, the light catching in the dust and fireflies, like God was trying to remind us of something beautiful, something simple. "I wrote to you," she said. "I sent 4 letters after the summer of '44. None came back. I never got them." She nodded slowly. "I figured that much. But after the last one, after nothing for months, after hearing that most of your company was gone, I stopped waiting. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to stand up and shout that she should have known I'd survive, that I'd crawl home if I had to, that she, of all people, should have felt me out there, alive. But all I could do was stare at her hands folded in her lap and wonder how something once so familiar could feel like a stranger's. "I loved you," she whispered. "I still do, in ways I don't have words for, but love doesn't stop you from being alone at night. And Michael?" She didn't answer right away. She looked down the road where the trees swayed like they were listening. "He was there, when I couldn't stand, when I couldn't breathe, when my world cracked open and you were nowhere in it. He was there. I didn't plan it. I didn't even want it at first. I was just tired of crying, tired of being scared." She finally turned to look at me, her eyes full of something that wasn't guilt, but wasn't peace either. "He was kind, gentle, and he never asked for anything more than what I could give. Maybe that's why it happened." There was a silence then, not cold, not cruel, just final, like 2 soldiers laying down their weapons, realizing there's no fight left, that either of them can win. "I saw her," I said, "the little girl in the photo." Sarah's breath caught for a moment. She's your niece," she said softly, deliberately. "At least that's what everyone says. But not you." She didn't respond. "She looks like me," I continued. "She has our father's eyes." "I know. And I could have asked for the truth, demanded it, begged for it, screamed until it spilled out of her like confession. But something in her voice, in her refusal to lie, told me everything I needed to know. And I realized then that knowing wouldn't fix anything. It wouldn't bring us back. It wouldn't rewrite time. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I nodded, but I didn't say it back. Not because I didn't forgive her. I think I did, in some quiet part of me that still wanted her to be happy. But because sorry didn't belong to her alone. We had both been victims of time, of war, of silence too long endured. We sat there until the sky turned navy and the cicadas sang louder than our thoughts. And then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a handkerchief, old, faded, embroidered with my initials. She held it out, and I took it like a man reaching for something he'd lost in a fire. I folded it slowly, carefully, like it was still sacred. "Keep it," she said. "It's the only thing of yours I never gave back." I stood up. So did she. I didn't reach for her, and she didn't ask me to stay. "I'm glad you came back," she said. "I'm glad you were loved," I replied. She turned and walked away, her steps soft on the gravel, her silhouette small beneath the trees. I didn't follow. I sat back down, handkerchief in my hand, and watched her until she disappeared. There was no anger left in me, just something else, something like peace, or maybe the beginning of it. I left the handkerchief on her porch the next morning, folded neatly with a note tucked inside. Not a letter, not a goodbye, just a sentence written in pencil that read, "This was always yours, even when I was gone." I didn't ring the bell. I didn't wait for someone to answer the door. I simply laid it there, walked down those old wooden steps for the last time, and kept going, not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood that love doesn't always mean staying. I didn't go back to the family house. I didn't pack my things or argue with my brother or try to reclaim a space that no longer belonged to me. Instead, I took a bus west, past the cornfields and the hills, past every place that reminded me of who I used to be, until the map grew strange again and I could start from something blank. I ended up in Missouri, in a small town with more churches than bars and a blacksmith shop that needed an extra pair of hands. The man who owned it said I looked like someone who had been through hell and learned how to keep quiet about it. And I told him that was more accurate than he could know. He hired me that afternoon, handed me a hammer, and said, "Hit what needs fixing." And I did. Each morning I'd walk to work, the cold metal of the tools waking up my palms, and I'd let the rhythm of shaping steel take me somewhere softer. I learned to bend iron into gates, fix hinges, reforge things broken. There was something almost holy in the work, in taking something wrecked and giving it another use. The people there didn't ask many questions. I was just another man who came back from war with quiet eyes and hands that trembled when they held still too long. The widow who lived across the lane brought me cornbread on Sundays. The shopkeeper always gave me a discount without saying why. They didn't know my story, and I didn't offer it. That was part of the healing, being unknown, starting not from what I'd lost, but from what I could still give. Some nights, I still folded my clothes with the precision of a soldier, and every time I smoothed out my shirt, I saw the faint line where Sarah's letter used to press against my heart. That crease never fully disappeared, no matter how many times I washed the fabric. It was like a scar, not visible to anyone else, but always there for me, reminding me of what I carried. I never married. Not because I didn't want to, but because some part of me stayed on that church step, holding her name in silence. I saw families grow around me, watched children run down the streets with kites and baseball gloves, and I learned to be happy for them without wanting it for myself. Years later, I passed through Ohio again, on my way to visit an old army buddy who'd taken ill. I didn't stop in our town, but the train slowed near it, and from the window I saw a woman walking hand in hand with a little girl along the road that led to the church. She had the same hair color as Sarah, the same way of tilting her head when she laughed. I didn't get off. I didn't need to. That part of my life had found its own way forward, even if I wasn't there to witness it. Now, when I see young people falling in love, when I hear them say, "I'll wait for you," or "promise me," I want to tell them, don't wait too long. Don't let time do what war can't, because hearts don't break all at once. They bend, they shift, and then, quietly, they learn to live with the missing pieces. Sarah taught me what it means to love without holding on. The war taught me what it means to lose without bitterness. And maybe that's all the peace I ever needed. We share new stories every day, true tales that move, inspire, and linger long after the screen fades to black. If this one touched something in you, tell us your story.